A chair had been set for everyone except for me. I lingered in the doorway of the dining room, both hands gripping a small wrapped present. The aroma of cinnamon-glazed ham and fresh pine filled the house. Someone had put effort into setting things up. The candles on the table were lit, name cards written in neat cursive, and crystal glasses sparkling in the gentle light. I couldn't find my name anywhere. At the head of the table sat my older brother, Nathaniel Carter, still broad-shouldered and wearing that trademark smirk, as if it were a permanent part of his face. He carved slices from the honey ham as if he ruled the gathering. Maybe he believed he did. Sierra Grant was to his right, my cousin. She was draped in one of my mother, Elaine Harper's, old scarves, a pale green silk one that Elaine used to reserve for December 20th services. Sierra sipped from her wine glass as though she belonged here, as if this place had always been hers. I scanned the room once more. Perhaps I had overlooked something. Maybe a chair had been moved aside so the pies could fit on the table. However, the table was now perfectly arranged and crowded. There was no place for me. I looked over at my mother. She was busy spreading marshmallows on the sweet potatoes and making a point not to meet my gaze. As I started to say something, she fixed her eyes on the turkey as if she expected it to respond. I quietly told her that it seemed she had forgotten to set my place. My older brother, Nathaniel Carter, didn't even slow his eating. He replied in a steady, uncaring tone, not bothering to look at me. He said my seat was outside with the dogs. A stunned hush settled over the room. Sierra quietly snickered. A second cousin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Someone's fork made a sharp sound on the plate, but nobody spoke up. There were no laughs, and nobody objected. I remained standing, my face flushed with humiliation. I really couldn't tell whether it hurt more that Nathaniel said it, or that everyone else allowed the tension to linger in the room like an unsaid wish no one dared take ownership of. I could have turned around. I might have shouted, caused a disruption. Instead, I moved forward, placed the little box in front of my older brother's plate, and then leaned in close enough for only him to hear me say, "Check beneath your plate," before heading out. I didn't stick around to see if anyone would stop me. I didn't glance over my shoulder. I simply walked into the chill of the December evening and let the icy air remind me that I was alive. When I was young, December 21st was the day I loved more than any other. At that time, the tree sat by the window in the living room. It wasn't staged for pictures, just a slightly crooked pine covered in mismatched decorations my family had gathered as the years went by. My older brother and I would bicker over whose job it was to put up the glass reindeer, the one with the damaged antler. My father would end our arguments by keeping what we fought over for himself and announcing, "This one's for peace, and peace stays neutral." That summed up my dad. He carried the scent of motor oil and cedar shavings, and he always sported a grease mark on his shirt, even during December 21st. Yet his smile had a way of making the entire space feel grounded. My father would tousle my hair and say, "You've got grit, kid. You're going to outlast all of us." At the time, I didn't understand what he was trying to say. I assumed he was only joking around. Now, I suspect he saw something in me that I hadn't realized myself. My older brother, Nathaniel Carter, was different back then too. Nathaniel and I once built a snow fort so tall neither of us could see past it. While attempting to scale it, I slid on the ice and split my lip, and Nathaniel shed more tears than I did. He carried me inside, frantically calling out for my mother, Elaine Harper. He bundled me up in a blanket and I said, "You aren't ever allowed to die." That was the version of my older brother who always offered me the last piece of fudge and let me ride up front with him whenever we fetched firewood. I have no idea what became of him. I can't pinpoint when he disappeared. My mother would sing as she prepared meals. Her singing was gentle, rarely quite tuneful, but I recall her softly humming "Silent Night" while she peeled potatoes. Every now and then, she would spin lightly in her slippers, her apron fluttering a little, especially when she believed nobody saw her. I always noticed. She always made sure my favorite mug, white with faded holly leaves, was waiting for me, filled with hot cocoa and an excessive pile of marshmallows. This year, I didn't see that mug. Here. I hadn't really expected to, but I still noticed its absence. What became of that home? What happened to the family who once filled it? Am I the only one left who remembers? The good parts? Because at some point, the laughter grew edged, the warmth faded, and my older brother began to speak as if he alone could decide what the family meant. My words seemed quieter. My own name began to appear less and less, until eventually, it vanished entirely. Yet, I continued to be there, telling myself it was only grief, telling myself it was just tension, wishing they would finally notice me. But if I nurse hope for too long, it can lose its vision. And I believe that's what happened to me. The change was gradual. There was no argument, no banging doors, or any dramatic break. Nobody shouted for me to go. Nobody told me, "You're not family anymore." They simply left me out. At first, it was hard to spot. I would call to see how my father was doing. This was during the time when his memory first started to fail, and he began forgetting tool names. Or he'd call me that girl on the other end of the line, Sierra Grant, my cousin. And Nathaniel Carter, my older brother, would always answer with his usual cheerful tone. "My father is resting at the moment. I'll be sure to let him know you called." After a few days, I would try reaching out once more. "He's a bit out of it today. It's not really the best moment." Eventually, I no longer heard my father's voice at all. There were only updates from my older brother, who expressed worry and seemed intent on shielding someone. My mother started to hold back as well. When I inquired about how she was coping, she would reply with remarks like, "Nathaniel's been incredibly helpful. He really knows what to do. It's just simpler having him handle everything." In the beginning, I chose not to press the issue. I convinced myself that they must just be exhausted, or maybe I was overreacting. At that time, I was living in Eugene and working long hours for a marketing agency. Every month, I sent money back home, helped cover part of the roof repairs without being asked, and reserved flights home for all the important holidays. Yet, I started to notice a few things. On December 21st, I noticed that my old stocking was missing from its usual spot on the fireplace mantel. Eventually, I discovered it buried in the back of the hallway closet. The framed photograph of me with my father, taken on the day he gave me his old toolbox, disappeared from the wall. Replacing it was a fresh picture of Nathaniel Carter and Sierra Grant at the garden center, holding a tray of mums as if they'd just rescued our family home. I reassured myself that this was insignificant. Then on a Saturday, I logged onto social media and saw images from what they described as a spur-of-the-moment family dinner. Everyone was there. They were gathered around the same table I used to help set, laughing together, their feet brushing beneath the chairs I'd sanded with my father. Nobody had reached out to me. No one had so much as mentioned it. When I brought it up to my mother, she told me it happened without much warning. "You're so far away. I assumed you wouldn't want the trouble." She either didn't realize how her comments would come across, or simply decided to let them sting. From that moment, it became obvious what was happening. All the choices about my father's care, the house, and the finances happened without my input. Nathaniel Carter, my older brother, would fill me in afterward, his voice always suggesting he was doing me a kindness. He'd say things like, "Didn't want to interrupt while you're so busy. It's just simpler like this." Simpler. For whom exactly? I wasn't upset, at least not yet. I just felt bewildered, unsteady. It was as if someone kept turning down the dial on my voice until I could barely hear myself. No one explicitly asked me to leave. They just stopped keeping a spot open for me. The first moment I realized Sierra Grant, my cousin, was living there. She picked up the phone in my mother's kitchen. Through the receiver, I could hear the soft tapping of a spoon against my mother's favorite mug, the one decorated with cardinals. I could hear my cousin laughing at something in the background, no doubt my older brother, and saying, "Hang on, your mother's got her arms deep in pie dough." Your mother? That phrase lingered in my chest for several days, weighing heavily on me. About a week later, I brought it up gently with my mother, making sure not to sound like I was accusing her of anything. "Is Sierra staying with you at the moment? Just helping around?" "She's been a blessing. You're aware of how things have been lately." A blessing. This is the very same Sierra who, 4 years earlier, borrowed my mother's sapphire earrings and claimed she thought they belonged to her. Who wasn't honest about a lost checkbook during Thanksgiving, who once wept out on the porch and asked, "I just don't get why everyone sees me as the troublemaker." And now, she was the one setting the table I used to arrange. Draping myself in the scarves my mother would wear on frosty mornings, I left handwritten notes and took the chickens from the fridge straight into the oven. Then I drove my mother, Elaine Harper, to her physical therapy appointment. At first, I justified it as sensible. My parents needed someone present, and I hadn't been there, at least not physically. Yet gradually, Sierra Grant, my cousin, transitioned from being an assistant to becoming the person who always knew where everything was kept. Whenever I called to check on how my father's doctor appointment went, my cousin Sierra was the one who picked up. When I arranged for flowers to be delivered to my mother for her birthday, Sierra sent a text of thanks along with a photo of my mother, Elaine Harper, holding the bouquet while standing next to her. The caption beneath the photo said, "She loved them. Great day." I was absent from that picture. I no longer appeared in any photos. I began to press for details. My older brother, Nathaniel Carter, responded with only generalities. "She's just nearby to help run errands." It's not as though she's taking charge. Yet when I came back for my father's memorial, it was Sierra who welcomed guests at the entrance. She dressed in a plain, elegant black dress, the very same one I had worn. I recognized the dress from my uncle's funeral several years earlier. I could tell by the way the hem ended right above the knee. I had left that dress in the upstairs closet. It didn't belong to her. She lingered beside the coffee table, pouring cider and sharing anecdotes about my father as if she had been closer to him than I ever was. Everyone nodded along. They offered polite smiles. They took her words as truth. Meanwhile, I just stood there, coat still in hand, shivering, silently observing as my role vanished one fragment at a time. Later that night, I attempted to discuss it with my mother, Elaine. I wasn't aiming to blame anyone. I simply wanted clarity about my place. She's only trying to be supportive, I told myself. I have always been overly sensitive about these matters. That was when the truth dawned on me. It wasn't that they didn't remember me. Instead, it seemed they had found someone far simpler to substitute me with. 2 months before December 21st, I made the drive to the house unannounced. I hadn't originally intended to visit. I figured I might as well just park in the driveway, gaze at the weathered porch swing, and try to recall the version of myself who still belonged here. However, once I arrived, I noticed the driveway was deserted. There was no trace of my older brother's truck. I didn't see my cousin peering out from the window. The kitchen was quiet, devoid of any activity. Even so, I went ahead and got out of the car. My key continued to work without any issue. Compared to my memory, the house felt even more silent. There were no traces of music or television, only the steady drone of the heater and the quiet creaking of those same floorboards, which always made themselves heard when the house was empty. I unconsciously wandered toward my father's study. That ended up being the single space that hadn't been altered by anyone. The rest of the house gave off a subtly unfamiliar vibe, as if everything was carefully arranged to appear normal, but lacked its true spirit. In contrast, the study, my father's study, remained exactly as he'd left it. The well-worn recliner still had its familiar dip at the center. The toolbox sat beneath the bookshelf, its paint peeling and corroded with rust. A quiet ticking came from the clock near the window, the one with its dull glass and brass hands always lagging a full 10 minutes behind. That's when my eyes landed on it. The cabinet tucked away in the corner, its wood dark and its brass handle gleaming faintly. Throughout my childhood, I'd watched my father, Russell, open that cabinet countless times, though I never took note of what he put inside. I crouched down and gave the door a tug. It was stuck at first, but then opened, revealing a compact metal safe. A rush of nerves hit me. Out of nowhere, a memory surfaced. Back in high school, my father had slipped a tiny key into his most cherished book, saying it was there, just in case. I stood and scanned through the shelf. There was Travels with Charlie by Steinbeck, the binding worn, leather cracked. Sure enough, the key sat right where he'd left it. As the safe unlocked with a click, I wasn't sure what I'd find. Maybe some old receipts, maybe nothing at all. But there it was, an envelope made of thick, creamy paper. My name appeared on the front, written in his handwriting. I lowered myself to the floor, hugged my knees, and carefully opened it. Inside, there was a notarized will, dated 3 weeks before he died. All of his belongings, this home, his savings, and the property in Crater Lake, had been left to me. My older brother's name was not included at all. My cousin's name didn't appear either. Behind the will, I found a note, the paper slightly yellowed around the edges and neatly folded. It read, "I understand now. I didn't before, and I'm sorry. You never asked for anything. You simply stayed. When no one else did, you sheltered me. This home belongs to you. You deserve it. With love, Russell." At the funeral, I didn't shed a tear. My tears fell instead while I sat there on that floor. They weren't about inheriting the house, but because, ultimately, someone had truly noticed me. I hadn't told anyone I was on my way. I put on dark jeans and a navy blue coat. There was nothing showy or attention-seeking about it. I carried only one package, plain brown wrapping tied up with twine. It was December 20th. The Blake house still displayed that same unevenly blinking string of colored lights. The door's wreath hung a bit askew. The welcome mat had been swapped out. It had once read, "Home is where my father is." Now it displayed, "Joyful season." I rapped on the door once and then let myself inside. At first, nobody noticed I was there. The dining room was already crowded. I sat at the head of the table, with Sierra Grant on my right, her hand gently touching my arm. Elaine Harper sat across from us, beaming with that gentle and somehow distant expression she once saved for company. Once more, my usual seat was missing. This time, I didn't hesitate. I moved further in, set the box in the middle of the table, and locked eyes with my older brother, Nathaniel. He paused mid-blink. "What are you?" Nathaniel began, but I refused to let him finish speaking and cut him off. "Look beneath your plate," I told him, keeping my voice steady and quiet. He looked down, lifted the charger, and discovered a lone key lying there. The key was made of old brass, its surface polished smooth from constant handling. It was my father's safe key. My older brother's eyes shot up to meet mine. At first he looked confused, but then I noticed a flicker of a different emotion. Uneasiness crept in. Not yet, though. He still didn't know enough to be scared. My mother started to rise from her seat, her smile faltering. "Audrey, this isn't—" "I'm not staying," I interrupted. "I just stopped by to return that." Sierra reached for the box. Is this supposed to be a present? I really looked at her for the first time all night. I could almost see straight through her, honestly. Sort of. She blushed and withdrew her hand. I turned back toward the exit. Nobody came after me. Nobody really asked me to remain. Not genuinely. Nathaniel was already opening the lid of the box. Elaine said, "Hold on. What is this?" I was halfway down the front steps when the sound of chairs scraping and voices rising reached me. I didn't pause. The night air was biting, cold on my throat. I returned to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, letting the quiet take hold. The contents of that box weren't meant to wound anyone. They simply carried the truth. Inside was the copy of my father's will. There was also the letter and a small photograph of me and my father, standing shoulder to shoulder. During the summer, I helped him mend the fence. Nothing extravagant, just enough. I decided to let them discover it in their own words, at their own pace. I would let them gather at that table, all present but with one seat always conspicuously vacant. Would they still claim that I was merely too sensitive? Insist that I made the whole thing up? And if so, who was it that left that key? The calls began the next morning. The first was from my mother, Elaine Harper. She only left a voicemail. "Hi, sweetie. After you left, it took all of us by surprise. We simply weren't expecting it, that's all. I think we should have a conversation. I'm convinced that we all need a chance to pause, maybe reconnect as a family." There was no apology, only surprise. Soon after, my older brother, Nathaniel Carter, texted me. He asked if we could meet and said there was plenty we needed to talk about. Nathaniel mentioned he felt we had all misread one another. He didn't bring up the will or the letter at all. Following that, my cousin Sierra Grant sent me a message. It was only a sad face emoji, and nothing more. For an entire week, I let her messages stack up in my inbox. They tried all sorts of tactics, expressing confusion, invoking fond memories, and even appealing to guilt. My father, Russell Blake, wouldn't want to see us divided, Audrey. We're all still your family. Let's avoid letting hard feelings spoil December 21st. But resentment wasn't what had changed everything. What really had changed everything was Eraser. The truth is, I no longer felt angry. I realized I didn't want to get even. I had no desire to prove any kind of argument. All I wanted was to stay away. I never blocked their numbers. I never argued back. I didn't try to defend myself. Eventually, I simply stopped replying. I'm fairly sure that unsettled them more than anything I could have said. One afternoon, my older brother showed up at my office without warning. My assistant turned him away before I even knew he was there. I never instructed her to do so. Later, she just remarked that he hadn't seemed like someone I'd want to see. She was absolutely right. A few days passed, and then my mother phoned again. That time, I answered. My mother's voice was subdued, delicate. "Audrey, I know we made mistakes, but this family, it's still yours too." I waited a moment before replying that I had always been there. They just found it easier when I stayed away. My mother didn't respond, not because what I'd said was wrong, but because there was nothing left to add. 4 weeks after December 21st, I sent one final envelope through the mail. I left off any return address. Inside, I placed the original picture of my father and me. It was from rebuilding the fence, the same photo that had been quietly removed from the wall. I had hung it on the hallway wall several years back. I left it without any message. There wasn't any need for me to add one. 7 days after that, a neighbor sent me a photo. I hadn't requested it from her. She simply believed I'd appreciate the update. Someone had put the picture back up, but it wasn't hung in our home. In other words, not above the fireplace or next to the dining room table. Instead, it was pinned inside the old shed behind the garden, my father's tool shed. That was the only spot nobody else ever really visited. There, it hung a little askew right over the work table. In the image, it was just me and my father, side by side and grinning as if everything in the world fit together. There was nothing written beneath it, and no explanation included. I gazed at that photograph for quite a while before putting my phone away. On record, that house might be mine, but my true legacy was not made of wood or stone. What I truly inherited was this understanding. I realized I didn't require anyone to acknowledge what they'd done because the reality is always present, no matter how much I try to disregard it. I'm still living in Eugene. I still use that holly mug I quietly took after the memorial. Every winter, a new chip appears, and I let it happen. Sometimes people ask whether I ever found closure with my family. I respond by saying I was in the story all along. They simply crafted the narrative around my absence. Now, they no longer have the power to leave me out. I never wanted acknowledgement. My only wish was to exist. If you've ever felt invisible but held fast to your truth, just leave a single heart icon.